For the final part, we're going to look at the biological approach to explaining and treating OCD. We need to be aware of genetic and neural explanations as well as drug therapy. So the biological approach to explaining OCD, this involves genetic and neural explanations. So for the genetic explanation, Lewis found that of his patients, 37% have parents with OCD and 21% had siblings with OCD. According to the diathesis stress model, certain genes leave some people more likely to develop a mental disorder, but it is not certain. Environmental stresses are necessary to trigger the condition. So there's strong support for a genetic component for OCD, as evidence shows that it runs within families. However, you just need to be aware that the genes could make someone more vulnerable to developing OCD. It doesn't mean that they will develop OCD, it just means that they're more likely to if they experience specific environmental stresses. Within the genetic explanation, we've got candidate genes. So these are genes which create a vulnerability to OCD. Some of these genes are involved in regulating serotonin. For example, the gene 5-HT1D beta is implicated in the transport of serotonin across synapses. So this gene has been linked to the vulnerability of OCD. So some individuals with OCD may have this gene, and this gene is linked to the transport of serotonin across the synapse. So this gene also links to the neural explanation, which is to do with the levels of serotonin. There's also evidence to suggest that OCD is polygenetic. So that means that OCD is not just caused by one single gene, but a combination of genetic variations that together significantly increase vulnerability. So again, it's this idea that you might have a set of genes that are linked to the role of OCD, but if you have this combination of genes, it doesn't mean that you're going to definitely have OCD. Findings of previous studies have found evidence that up to 230 different genes may be involved in OCD. Genes that have been studied in relation to OCD include those associated with the action of dopamine as well as serotonin, neurotransmitters which have a role in regulating mood. So again, these genetic explanations and these genes that are associated with OCD are also associated with the role or action of serotonin. And this links to the neural explanation. So, one explanation for OCD involves the role of serotonin. This helps regulate mood by relaying information from one neuron to another across a synapse. If a person has low levels of serotonin, normal transmission of mood-relevant information does not take place and a person may experience low mood. So basically, if they have low levels of serotonin, then information doesn't pass from that presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic neuron. That information is not passed on, and this therefore could cause an individual to suffer from low mood. Another explanation, which is another neural explanation, links to impaired decision making. This in turn may be associated with abnormal functioning of the lateral frontal lobes of the brain. The frontal lobes are responsible for logical thinking and making decisions. There is also evidence to suggest that an area called the left parahippocampal gyrus associated with processing functions abnormally in OCD. So for the neural explanation, you've got this idea that an individual may have low levels of serotonin, which could cause them to suffer from low mood and could be linked to OCD, or they could have areas of the brain, such as the left parahippocampal gyrus, which are behaving abnormally, and this could link to some of the symptoms of OCD. In evaluation, so we've got two strengths for the genetic explanation, a strength and a limitation for the genetic explanation, and a strength and a limitation for the neural explanation. So for the genetic explanation, a strength, there is research supporting the genetic explanation of OCD. Twin studies, we've got Nestat et al. 2010, they reviewed twin studies and found that 68% of identical twins, monozygotic, shared OCD as opposed to 31% of non-identical twins, dizygotic. And with regards to family studies, researchers found that a person with a family member diagnosed with OCD is around 4 times as likely to develop it as someone without. So twin studies and family studies show a higher percentage or likelihood of an individual developing OCD or a higher level of concordance if they share those genes. So it supports this genetic explanation. A limitation, OCD does not appear to be entirely genetic. So if we think about concordance rates, they're never 100%. And although that study said you're around 4 times as likely to develop it, if a family member has it, it's not certain that you will develop it. So it's not entirely genetic. Chromatal 2007 found that over half of OCD clients in their sample had experienced a traumatic event in their past. OCD was also more severe in those who had 1 or more past traumas. This means that genetic vulnerability provides a partial explanation. So we can't solely rely on a biological explanation. For OCD, we also have to consider the role of the environment in the development of OCD. With regards to the neural explanation, a strength, there is research to support the role of serotonin in OCD. Antidepressants that work on serotonin are effective in reducing OCD symptoms. This suggests that serotonin may be involved in OCD. For that strength, if you like, you can use some of the research from the evaluation of drug therapies to support that point if you wish to do so. So some of the evaluation points that we're going to go through in a minute when we're talking about antidepressants, you can use that to support the role of serotonin, because if antidepressants work, especially those that focus on the role of serotonin, then it shows that it's a relevant explanation. You can also link that strength there to the idea that we can use the biological explanation to develop drug therapies and link that again to antidepressants, and that's sort of a real-world application of this. Limitation of the neural explanation. OCD is often comorbid, so it goes alongside other disorders. People with OCD often experience clinical depression. Depression probably involves the disruption to the activity of serotonin. This is an issue as it could be that the activity of serotonin is disrupted in people with OCD due to their depression. So it could be that the depression is linked to the OCD and it's not solely the serotonin on its own that is the cause of the OCD. It could be something else. The link between OCD and serotonin is therefore correlational and we cannot establish causality. Okay, so that's our biological explanation for OCD. So we've got genetic explanations and neural explanations, and we've got some evaluation points for each of those. And then we've got the biological approach to treating OCD. So this is drug therapy. And the drug therapy we're going to focus on is the role of antidepressants. So, antidepressants. Low levels of serotonin are associated with OCD, therefore drugs to treat OCD increase the levels of serotonin in the brain. The first one we're going to look at is SSRIs. SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, are used to tackle the symptoms of OCD. These work by preventing serotonin being reabsorbed into the presynaptic neuron or broken down within that synapse, therefore keeping it in the synapse for longer. This increases the level of serotonin in the synapse and continues to stimulate the postsynaptic neuron. So for that, you might want to draw a diagram to help you remember it. You can also use this to help you with your biological psychology. So within that topic on paper 2, You can use in biopsych, when you're looking at the role of neurons and how they work, you can use SSRIs there as an example of how drugs can affect synapses, or you might just want to use it to help with your revision, to help you understand what goes on with regards to a synapse. Also, you can use this to support the biological approach as well. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail at the end, like I just did for the behavioural explanation. So back to antidepressants. So we've got SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and if those don't work, so they're the first sort of line of treatment for an individual who's suffering from OCD with regards to drug treatments. Then if they don't work, then we might try a tricyclic. So tricyclics work in a similar way to SSRIs. They target the serotonin systems. However, that should say, the side effects are more severe than SSRIs. So tricyclics do something similar to SSRIs, but their side effects are more severe. Then we have SNRIs, serotonin noradrenaline reuptake inhibitors. They've more recently been used to treat OCD. These are again used for those who do not respond to SSRIs, and they increase levels of serotonin and noradrenaline, so they focus on more than one of those neurotransmitters. Drugs are often used alongside cognitive behavioural therapy to treat OCD. The drugs reduce a person's emotional symptoms, such as feeling anxious or depressed. This means that people can participate in the CBT sessions more effectively. So for drug treatments, we've got 3 different types of antidepressants. And you really need to know how those SSRIs work and what they focus on and how they differ from the tricyclics and the SNRIs. And then in evaluation, so strength. There is research to support the effectiveness of drug treatment. Evidence shows that SSRIs reduce symptom severity and improve the quality of life for people with OCD. Research which reviewed 17 studies that compared SSRIs to placebos in the treatment of OCD. All 17 of these studies showed significantly better outcomes for SSRIs than for the placebo conditions. Typically, symptoms reduced for around 70% of people taking SSRIs. So this research, this review of studies, shows that SSRIs are effective in treating OCD. However, there is some evidence to suggest that even if drug treatments are helpful for most people with OCD, it may not be the most effective treatment available. So there's some other research here from 2016, which again is a review of studies, and this research concluded that both cognitive and behavioural therapy is more effective than SSRIs in the treatment of OCD. That means that drugs might not be the optimal treatment for OCD. And that point there, that they might not be the most effective, and cognitive behavioural therapy is also effective, it kind of highlights this idea that OCD may not be entirely biological, and there may be a cognitive element to it that also needs to be addressed. So you could say that this biological explanation for OCD is incomplete, so that would link back to the previous point, so the biological explanations there. So strength, so even though cognitive behavioural therapy might be seen as more effective, it's also more expensive. So drugs are cost effective and non-destructive to people's lives. Drug treatments for psychological disorders are cheap compared to psychological treatments because many thousands of tablets or liquid doses can be manufactured in the time it takes to conduct one session of psychological therapy. Using drugs to treat OCD is therefore good value for the NHS and is a good use of limited funds. You can simply take the drugs until your symptoms decline. This is quite different from psychological therapy, which involves time spent attending therapy sessions. So that's a good thing about using drug therapy. Limitations. Drugs can have potentially serious side effects. SSRIs have side effects such as indigestion and blurred vision. The side effects are usually temporary, however, they can be quite distressing for people, and for a minority, they are long lasting. Tricyclic side effects are more common and can be more serious. For example, more than 1 in 10 people experience weight gain, and 1 in 100 become aggressive and experience heart-related problems. This means that some people have a reduced quality of life as a result of taking drugs, and they stop taking them altogether, meaning the drugs are no longer effective. So I think combining all of those evaluation points together, it's this idea that using drug therapy alongside cognitive behavioural therapy is probably the best route to go about treatment for OCD. However, behavioural therapy is expensive and drug therapy is more cost effective, so that's why it tends to be used more often. So, the biological approach to explaining and treating OCD. So you've got the genetic explanation, which is your candidate genes and the idea that it's polygenetic and you have a genetic vulnerability to OCD, but that doesn't necessarily mean you are going to develop OCD. You have the neural explanation, which is the role of serotonin and the impaired decision making, linking to that parahippocampal gyrus. Then you have got drug therapy, and that's the antidepressants, so the SSRIs, the tricyclics, and the SNRIs. And you have evaluation points for all of them. If you have a look at the practice questions, you'll see that there's some shorter mark questions there and some longer ones and some that link to an item. Also, I think there's a research method style question on those practice questions as well, looking at therapies and effectiveness and numbers and potentially, I don't think there's a drawing a graph question on that, but there's one to do with looking at numbers in a table and analysing that with regards to the effectiveness of a therapy. So please be aware that research methods could come up within this topic and within this paper. I mentioned that you could use evidence from the biological approach for OCD to support the biological approach in paper 2. So you can pull some information from this to explain how the biological approach works and why that's a good thing. You can also use it in paper 3 with regards to the idea of reductionism. So you could use this to support biological reductionism. So biological reductionism is a positive thing because if you use a biological approach and you narrow it down to the role of, for example, neurotransmitters like serotonin, then you can develop drugs such as SSRIs, which can be used to treat an individual. So you can use the biological approach in a few different areas. So once you've finished your revision for paper 1 and once you've sat that exam paper, you might want to dig out some of your notes from the biological approach to support issues and debates or to support the approaches section. Okay, so that's all of psychopathology and that's all of paper 1 covered now. Remember that research methods could come up anywhere on this paper. Do some research methods revision and have a look at some research method style questions. Have a look at some different types of questions for paper 1. So have a look at some extended answer questions, have a go at planning and writing some longer mark questions. A 16 mark question should take you no more than 20 minutes and that should include 3 to 5 minutes planning as well. So make sure you have a look at those questions and have a look at your timing and do some of those questions under timed conditions. You can access the past papers on the AQA website, and there's also some booklets of past paper questions as well on the Google site for psychology, so you can have a little look at those and you can have a go at some practice papers and questions for paper 1 and for the psychopathology unit. So yeah, complete your worksheet, make sure you've got all those key definitions down, make sure you've got the key studies and research down, Make sure you've got those formulas for your classical conditioning to help you revise. Maybe some drawings of the synapse to help you revise the role of SSRIs. And make sure you're aware of your evaluation points and practice doing some of those extended evaluation points where you link more than one thing together, so you have a strength and then you counteract that with a limitation within the same paragraph. So have a go at some of those extended peel paragraphs within those 16-mark questions. If you get an 8-mark question, an 8-mark question should take you 10 minutes. It's half of a 16-mark question, so that's 10 minutes, and you should have 2 or 3 minutes within that for planning if necessary, maybe 2 minutes planning, do a brief bullet pointed plan for those 8-mark questions. Have a go at the application questions as well, and make sure you're using that information from the item within your answer and you're showing that you have understood that item. Read the item, highlight it before you write your answer. Read the question, highlight the key terms before you write your answer also. Okay, so have a go at that, and then next week we'll start looking at some paper 2 content.